That's your wife.
She whispered, her voice sharp with disbelief as her glass shook in her hand. I saw Samuel's knees weaken, his fingers tightening around the edge of the table until his knuckles turned white. The hall roared with applause, the violins soared, but for him the sound was nothing but a suffocating silence. His mouth opened, then closed again, his lips moving without sound. He didn't need to answer. The truth was written all over his face, and the truth was standing before him, dressed in white uniform, my badge gleaming under the chandeliers. It wasn't a stranger leading this ship. It was me. And that was the moment his collapse truly began. But storms never arrive in an instant. They start as whispers, long before the waves are visible. So let me take you back to where it began. Before we dive deeper, let us know in the comments where you're watching from. We'd love to hear from you. And don't forget to hit that subscribe button so you never miss any of our upcoming stories. 3 days earlier, Samuel had stood before our congregation, Bible tucked under his arm, declaring that he was leaving for a spiritual retreat. He told them he wanted time with God, a quiet season to refresh his soul. His voice shook as he said it, and they thought it was because he was overwhelmed with the Spirit. I knew better. It was the tremor of a man caught in his own lie. The church clapped and prayed, some even cried, their pastor leaving to seek God's face. What they didn't know was that he was rushing to seek Marissa's. I knew about her. Of course I did. A wife always knows. Even when she says nothing, even when she keeps folding shirts, preparing meals, carrying the weight of home and ministry, she knows when silence has become heavier than love. At the docks, he carried her bags. She strutted in a fiery red dress, the kind of red that screams arrogance, sunglasses perched on her nose, lips curved into that cruel smile of hers. She wrapped herself around his arm like she owned him, laughing loud enough for everyone to hear. Nobody knows you here, Samuel. You're free. Free from that little church, free from her. This is paradise. He winced but said nothing. My Samuel, pastor, husband, father, the man I once watched tremble with nerves before preaching his first sermon, now reduced to a fool dragging another woman's luggage onto a ship he thought would hide him. I was already aboard, not as the wife he imagined waiting at home, but as captain of this very vessel. He thought I was too simple to notice, too meek to resist, too tied to his name to have an identity of my own. He forgot that while he was building sermons and chasing applause, I was building something else. He forgot that while he traveled for ministry work, I studied. While he prayed for revival in rented halls, I pored over charts, practiced simulations, and sat for exams until my fingers cramped. While he carried the microphone, I carried maps, and the day I received that envelope with its gold-embossed letters spelling out my name, Diana Blake, certified ship pilot, I smiled and said nothing. He didn't know. He never asked. He thought my world began and ended with his, but I had been quietly shaping my own. That evening, as the ship prepared to sail, I stood on the bridge, the horn bellowing across the harbor. Passengers cheered, waving to the shrinking shore. My crew straightened their caps, ready for orders, and somewhere below Samuel clinked champagne glasses with his mistress, grinning at a camera he never wanted to be in. She pushed him into every selfie, posting proof of her conquest, thinking herself victorious. She thought she had won something, but she had no idea whose ship she was sailing. Later that night, my officers told me how he leaned against the balcony of their suite, staring out at the black stretch of ocean. His face was pale, his shoulders hunched. He looked like a man carrying a stone in his chest. Inside, she was twirling with her phone in hand, recording clips, her laughter high-pitched and hollow. I could see it all in my mind without being there. I had imagined too many nights like this before, when he said he was away on church business but returned smelling of perfume that wasn't mine. And still, I didn't confront him. I didn't scream. I didn't rage. Patience had become my sharpest weapon. My father used to tell me, "The sea never hurries, Diana, but it always delivers." And so I waited. The next morning I walked the decks in uniform. Nobody looked at me twice. To them, I was just another officer going about her duties. But to me, every step was a reminder of the storm quietly gathering. I saw him pass by once. He walked stiffly, Marissa clinging to his arm, barking at him to take more photos of her by the pool. He looked at me, but not really. His eyes skimmed past me like I was nothing, just another blur in a sea of strangers. He didn't see me. He never truly saw me, even when I stood right in front of him. But I saw him. I always did. Marissa stretched on a lounge chair, her voice loud enough for 3 cabins to hear, demanding another cocktail, posing for strangers' glances. She thought she was admired, envied even by me. But I saw her for what she was, an empty vessel, loud because silence would reveal her hollowness. And Samuel, my husband, my pastor, followed her like a shadow. His laugh was awkward, his hands restless, his face drawn tight. He tried to play the role of a man enjoying his escape, but even from where I stood I could see guilt dripping from him like sweat. My officers reported every detail. "The man in the sunglasses?" one asked quietly, always watching over his shoulder, always sweating. "The woman he's with, loud, demanding." "Yes," I answered simply. "Keep observing." That night I heard from another steward. He told me Samuel had barely eaten at dinner, had sat stiffly while Marissa charmed strangers and bragged about their suite. Samuel muttered half-hearted answers, drank too much wine, and excused himself early. The steward asked me if I wanted him watched more closely. I smiled and shook my head. "No need. The ocean is already watching." And it was. Every secret step he took, every laugh he faked, every kiss he gave her, it echoed louder here, inside this ship, than anywhere else he could have hidden. By the second day, even Marissa noticed his unease. "You look like you're waiting for the police to burst in," she teased, sipping champagne by the pool. "Relax, Samuel. No one here cares who you are. No one even knows you." But she was wrong. I knew. And he knew, deep inside, that someone was watching. That's why his eyes kept flicking to every officer in uniform, as if he expected judgment in their stares. The sea has a way of whispering guilt back into a man's bones. By the evening of the second day, the ship was alive with music. Passengers danced, the pool shimmered under the deck lights, laughter rose like a tide. I walked among them in my uniform, unseen but respected, and everywhere I turned I heard the same whispers. "The new captain, she's different, quiet but sharp." They didn't know it was me. They didn't know that the woman steering this ship carried a wound sharper than any storm. Samuel sat stiffly at a poolside table, pretending to laugh at Marissa's jokes. She tossed her hair at the bartender, flashing him a smile that lingered longer than it should have. Samuel clenched his jaw, but said nothing. He had no right. He was the one who had broken vows, yet he still flinched at her shamelessness. I watched him through the reflection of the glass panels as Marissa leaned closer to the bartender, whispering something that made the young man blush. Samuel looked away, his knuckles tightening around the stem of his glass. That was his punishment, to sit in silence while the woman he betrayed me for paraded herself like a prize in front of strangers. He wanted to scold her, but the hypocrisy stuck in his throat like a stone. Later, when night had thickened around the decks, I stood on the balcony above the dance floor. The music pulsed, the lights flickered across the crowd. Marissa twirled in a red dress, dragging Samuel with her, laughing too loud, her lipstick smudged across his cheek. Passengers clapped for them, amused, entertained. But I didn't blink. I stood there in uniform, my face calm, my hands resting on the rail. He looked up once, just once, and I swear his eyes brushed mine before he looked away. Did he know? Did his soul recognize the silence of his own wife staring down at him? He would never admit it, but I saw the fear flash in him. When the music died and the crowd dispersed, I remained at the rail. The sea below was black, restless, endless. I whispered to myself, "The sea doesn't hurry, it delivers." and I knew it was almost time. On the third morning, Marissa woke first. My steward told me she stormed into the cafe demanding fresh fruit and coffee while Samuel dragged himself behind her. She snapped at him in front of strangers, berating him for looking tired. "You're a bore, Samuel. Look at everyone else. They're living, and you're sitting here like a widow. Maybe you're not used to being with a real woman." The people at the next table chuckled under their breath. Samuel's face burned, but he said nothing. He stared at his untouched plate, his fork scratching slowly across porcelain. I should have felt pity for him then, but pity had no place left in me. He had carved it out with every lie, every absence, every whisper he thought I wouldn't hear. That night, he stood by the railing again, staring at the sea while Marissa danced with strangers. The music pounded, her laughter slicing through the air. He rubbed his face with both hands, muttering to himself words only the waves could hear. I watched from the shadows above, my lips pressed tight. He looked broken, and yet still too proud to admit it. I wanted to tell him then that I was there, that it was me steering every mile of this voyage. But I held my silence, because silence was sharper than any confrontation. On the fourth day, the gala was announced. The passengers were buzzing with excitement. "The captain will be revealed tonight," the officers said. "You'll finally meet the one who has kept this ship steady." Whispers filled the halls, curiosity rising like smoke. Some thought the captain was a man, some thought he was old, some thought he was harsh. None imagined it would be me. Marissa was thrilled. "Imagine, Samuel," she exclaimed, pressing a new diamond necklace to her throat. "We'll meet the captain, maybe get special treatment, we'll be remembered." Samuel forced a smile, but sweat dotted his forehead. He didn't know why, but dread was already crawling into his chest. I saw it when he adjusted his tie in the mirror, when he hesitated before leaving their suite. Something inside him already knew the sea was bringing his truth to the surface. The ballroom glittered that night. Chandeliers rained gold. Violins sang. Gowns swept across the marble. Samuel tried to laugh, but his eyes were restless. Marissa pulled him into the crowd, demanding selfies, her diamond necklace catching every flicker of light. She preened, she bragged, she whispered about yachts and power and the life she expected him to give her. He nodded numbly, his chest heavy. And then the music softened. The curtains drew. The announcer's voice rose. "Ladies and gentlemen, allow me to present to you your captain." The applause thundered like a wave. Samuel's glass slipped from his hand and shattered across the floor. Marissa's gasp cut through the hall, and I stepped forward. For a moment, time slowed. The spotlight burned my face, the badge on my chest gleamed, my shoes echoed across marble. My lips curved into a polite smile as I saluted the passengers. I thanked them for their trust, greeted them with calm authority. I never once looked at Samuel. That was the deepest cut I could give him. He wasn't worth acknowledgement. He was less than a stranger in that moment. Beside him, Marissa's voice was a hiss. "That's your wife. Samuel, that's your wife." Her nails dug into his sleeve. "You lied to me. You told me she was nothing. How could you let me parade around like this? She's the captain." The curtains drew back and the spotlight landed on me. For a moment the room fell into stunned silence, then erupted into thunderous applause. Passengers rose to their feet, clapping, cheering, eyes wide as they finally saw the captain they had only heard whispers about. Down below, Samuel's glass slipped from his hand and shattered on the floor. His face went pale, his lips trembling, his chest rising too fast. Marissa's voice tore through the clamor like a knife. "That's your wife," she hissed, her nails digging into his sleeve. "Samuel, that's your wife." I stood tall on the stage, uniform pressed, cap steady, badge gleaming under the chandeliers. I lifted the microphone and spoke with calm authority. I thanked the passengers for their trust, welcomed them aboard, reminded them that their safety and dignity would be guarded at every moment of this voyage. My voice was steady, precise, commanding, and all the while, though I never once looked at him, I could feel Samuel shrinking smaller and smaller in his chair. The crowd applauded again, louder than before. But instead of bowing and leaving the stage, I stepped down. The hall hushed in curiosity as I walked slowly between the glittering tables, passengers leaning forward, eager to greet their captain. I shook hands, nodded politely, smiled faintly at the people who reached out to me. But my steps were not for them. They were for him. I stopped at his table. Samuel's lips quivered, his voice a broken whisper. "Diana, The slap cracked across his face before he could finish. A sharp, ringing sound that silenced the violins and froze every conversation mid-breath. His head jerked to the side, his cheek flaming red, and for a heartbeat the entire hall gasped as one. I didn't shout. I didn't need to. My words carried sharper than any scream. "You disgrace not just me, Samuel. You disgrace the God you claim to serve, the vows you spat at the altar, and the people who once called you shepherd." Mouths fell open around us. Some passengers pressed hands to their lips. Others leaned forward as though they were watching the climax of a play. Marissa stumbled backward, her diamond necklace trembling against her throat, eyes wide, as if she herself had been struck. Samuel stood trembling, one hand to his cheek, his body shrunken under the weight of eyes that saw him for the hypocrite he was. His lips moved, but no words came. The man who once thundered from pulpits was now a silent fool, broken in the very room where he thought he would hide. I straightened my cap, turned without another glance, and walked back toward the stage. My heels struck the floor in rhythm with my heartbeat, each step echoing louder than his shame. When I faced the crowd again and gave a simple bow, the applause returned, rolling over me like thunder, drowning his humiliation beneath waves of admiration that belonged to me alone. The hall buzzed like a hive after I walked away. Whispers crackled from table to table, eyes darted, hands covered mouths as if to contain gasps. Some passengers leaned toward each other, hissing, "Did you see that?" Others simply stared, their applause still ringing in the air. And in the middle of it all sat Samuel, red-cheeked, trembling, shrinking further into his chair as though the marble floor itself might swallow him. Marissa was the first to find her voice. She grabbed his wrist and spat through gritted teeth. "You lied to me, Samuel. You made me look like a fool in front of the entire ship. That's your wife and she's the captain. Do you understand what kind of trap you've dragged me into?" "Marissa, please," he whispered, eyes darting toward the stairs around them. "Please." She yanked her arm free. "You told me she was weak, that she was simple, that she wouldn't even notice if you vanished. Look at her." She jabbed a finger toward me as I bowed again to the passengers. "She's running the entire ship while you sit here looking like a whipped dog." He flinched, tried to hush her, but she raised her voice louder, uncaring. "Pathetic. You're pathetic, Samuel. You can't even control your own wife, and you thought you could control me?" The room gasped again, some passengers laughing nervously, others shaking their heads. I heard every word, though I didn't turn. I didn't need to. My silence was the stage, and their disgrace the performance. When the music resumed, Samuel slumped back into his chair, staring at his untouched glass, his ears burning with the sound of whispers. Couples leaned close, speaking just loudly enough for him to hear. "That's the pastor, isn't it? The one with the mistress. I heard she caught him red-handed. Imagine the shame." He pushed his chair back and stumbled out of the hall. Marissa didn't follow at first. She soaked in the eyes, the murmurs, the attention. Then, with a toss of her hair and a bitter laugh, she stormed after him, her heels clattering against the marble. I watched them go, then returned to my duties. But the sea, I knew, wasn't finished with them. In their suite, the fight exploded. My steward later described how Marissa threw her shoes at the wall, her voice rising with every insult. "You told me we would be free, that she'd never know. And now look at us, look at me. I can't even walk down the hall without people pointing." Samuel tried to calm her, his voice breaking. "I didn't know she never told me." "Don't you dare," she cut him off, eyes blazing. "You didn't know your wife was a captain? You didn't know she could command a ship? What else don't you know, Samuel? Or maybe you just never cared enough to notice. The words struck harder than my slap had. He sank onto the bed, his hands over his face, his chest shuddering. Marissa paced the room, yanking her clothes from the wardrobe, throwing them into a suitcase. You're weak. You're nothing. I thought you were a man of power, but you're just a coward hiding behind sermons and lies. I don't want you. Not after this. She slammed the door behind her, leaving him alone in silence. But silence was the loudest sound of all. The next morning, gossip flooded the ship. Passengers whispered at breakfast tables. Crew members exchanged glances. I walked the decks, uniform crisp, posture tall, and wherever I went, people smiled, greeted me, even clapped. They admired me. But when Samuel appeared, they turned away, their voices hushed. He sat alone at a table by the window, head bowed, untouched food growing cold. One elderly woman leaned close to her husband and said, just loud enough for me to hear, "That's the pastor. Imagine, preaching holiness while sneaking away with a mistress." Her husband shook his head. And to be struck by his own wife in public, he'll never recover from that shame. Samuel heard it too. His hand shook as he lifted his coffee, his eyes darting, his shoulders sinking lower and lower. He looked like a man carrying stones in his chest. Later, as I walked past, one of my officers leaned toward me. "Captain, should we intervene? The man seems broken." I shook my head. The sea delivers what is due. Let it. That afternoon, Marissa paraded herself by the pool, already laughing with another man. She ignored Samuel completely, not even glancing his way. When he approached, she flicked her wrist dismissively. "Leave me alone, you've ruined enough already." He stood there for a moment, the sun burning his face, the laughter of strangers digging into his pride, then turned and walked away. I followed him with my eyes from the balcony above. His steps were slow, heavy, his shoulders bent. He moved like a man whose mask had finally cracked, revealing the hollow beneath. And as I watched, I whispered to myself, the sea never hurries, but it always delivers. That night he tried to seek me out. I knew it by the way he lingered outside the bridge, his shadow shifting just beyond the door. But he didn't enter. He didn't have the courage. Instead, he stood there for a long time, breathing heavily, before retreating back down the corridor like a ghost. My officers asked if I wanted him barred, if they should report him further. I only smiled faintly. "No," I said. "Let him wander. A man lost at sea will drown even on dry decks." And so he did. By the 5th day, there was no more hiding. Word had spread across the ship like wildfire. At breakfast tables, in corridors, at the poolside bar, his name was on their lips. The passengers might not have known the details, but they knew enough. The man who came aboard with a mistress had been publicly exposed by his own wife, the captain of the vessel. I didn't need to listen closely. Their whispers rose and fell everywhere I walked. "Is that him?" "Yes, that's the pastor." She slapped him right in front of everyone. Imagine, hiding behind sermons while sneaking around with a girl young enough to be his daughter. He tried to avoid their stares, but shame sticks like salt to skin. He ate alone now, tucked into corners of the dining hall. Every clink of cutlery sounded like judgment, every cough a condemnation. He picked at his food like a man who'd lost his appetite for life. And I walked through the same halls with my chin high, my uniform crisp, and strangers rose to greet me, thanking me for a safe voyage. His shame was mine no longer. It was his alone. Marissa, meanwhile, wasted no time. She had moved on to new prey by that morning, a businessman with gold rings and a belly that spoke of indulgence. She draped herself across him at the pool, laughing too loudly, sipping champagne he bought her. When Samuel approached, shoulders hunched, she barely glanced his way. "Go away, Samuel," she said, loud enough for everyone to hear. "You disgust me." He froze, his mouth opening, But she turned her back, twining her arm through the stranger's and pressing her lips to his cheek. The poolside erupted in chuckles, whispers, phones lifted subtly to capture the scene. Samuel stumbled back, his face red, his hands trembling as if he'd been struck again. I watched from the balcony above. My officers shifted uneasily, but I only said, "Let the sea finish what it started." That night at dinner, the whispers turned into open confrontation. A middle-aged woman approached his table, her eyes sharp as glass. She pointed a finger at him, her voice cutting across the room. "Shame on you. You stand in pulpits and preach holiness, and this is who you are? To betray a wife like that and in front of God and the world, shame." Samuel stammered, rising to his feet. "Please, madam, I—" But she was not finished. Her husband pulled her back gently, but her words rang out for everyone to hear. "Men like you think women will stay silent forever, but the tide always turns. Always." He sat down again, crumpled, his food untouched. Passengers stared openly now, some shaking their heads, others whispering prayers, a few snapping photos under the table. His disgrace had become entertainment. Later, as I walked the deck, a young couple approached me. "Captain," the woman said, eyes shining with admiration, "you're the strongest woman I've ever seen. To carry yourself with such dignity after what he did, you're an example to us all." I thanked her, smiling faintly, but inside I thought, strength isn't born in applause. It's born in silence, in the nights when you carry storms alone. Samuel must have felt the walls closing in because the next morning he sought out Marissa again. My steward told me the scene, every word of it, how he cornered her near the gift shop. "Please, Marissa, don't do this to me. Don't abandon me now." She laughed in his face. "Abandon you? Samuel, you were never mine. You were a fool with a ring on his finger and a Bible in his hand, too stupid to see you were a pawn in my game." She leaned closer, her voice like venom. "You were nothing but a vacation fling, and now, you're a joke. Everyone's laughing at you. Even your wife, up there in her captain's chair, she's laughing the loudest." He staggered back as though struck again, his lips trembling. But before he could speak, her new companion appeared, slipping an arm around her waist. She kissed the man in front of him, slowly, deliberately, her eyes locked on Samuel's the entire time. He broke. Right there, in the middle of the hall, with passengers watching. His chest heaved, his knees bent, and he covered his face with both hands as sobs tore out of him. The whispers were no longer whispers. They were open laughter, pity, disgust. "That's him, the pastor. Fallen so low. Look at him." I heard it from the bridge, reports trickling in from officers who had seen him collapse, and I whispered again, the words steady on my tongue. "The sea never hurries, but it always delivers." By the 6th day, he was a ghost of himself. He no longer walked the decks with pride. He avoided the dining halls, avoided the crowds. When he did appear, his head hung low, his clothes rumpled, his eyes red. He looked less like a pastor, less like a husband, and more like a prisoner walking the last mile of his sentence. But the voyage was not over. Not for him. Not yet. By the 7th day, Samuel had nowhere left to hide. Marissa had abandoned him, the passengers mocked him openly, and the crew looked through him as though he were invisible. He spent most of his hours alone on the upper deck, staring into the waves as if they might swallow him whole. He avoided the dining halls, skipped the gala events, and walked only at night when most passengers slept. But shame cannot be outrun, not even in the shadows. Wherever he turned, whispers followed. Couples leaned into each other, not bothering to lower their voices anymore. "That's him. The adulterer. The one the captain slapped." He flinched at every glance, every chuckle, shrinking smaller each time. I knew it was only a matter of time before he came to me. Broken men always circle back to the women they once ignored. Pride delays it, but desperation always wins. And so one night, As I stood at the bow watching the horizon bleed into black, I heard his steps. Slow, dragging, hesitant. "Diana." His voice was hoarse, trembling. "Please, please talk to me." I didn't turn. My eyes stayed fixed on the dark sea. "You've spoken enough, lied enough." He moved closer, his shoulders hunched, his hands clasped together like a man at prayer. "I was wrong. I see it now. I thought I could escape, that no one would know. But I know I've disgraced you. I know I've disgraced God." His voice cracked. "I've lost everything, but please don't let me lose you." The wind whipped between us, carrying the salt of the sea, the silence stretching taut. At last I turned, my face calm, my eyes steady. "You didn't lose me tonight, Samuel. You lost me the first time you chose her over me. You lost me when you thought I was too small to notice, too quiet to resist, too simple to ever command a ship of my own." He flinched, tears spilling down his cheeks. Please forgive me. I'll repent. I'll confess to the church. I'll do anything you ask. Just don't turn your back on me." The laugh that slipped from my lips was soft, but it cut him deeper than my slap had. "Confess to the church?" Samuel, your congregation already whispers. "They will see the pictures, hear the stories. Do you think they will ever trust you again? Do you think the men will look at you as a shepherd, or the women will open their hearts to you in prayer? No. They will see what I see now. A coward who thought the sea would hide his sins." He collapsed then, right there on the deck, his knees hitting the steel with a hollow clang. His hands clutched at my uniform, his forehead pressing against the floor. "Diana, please, don't leave me like this." I bent slightly, just enough for my words to reach his ear. "The sea never hurries, Samuel, but it always delivers." I stepped back, leaving him kneeling on the deck, his sobs torn away by the wind. Passengers who wandered by later whispered of the sight. The great Pastor Samuel Blake, once a man of booming sermons and thundering prayers, reduced to a weeping shell, begging at the feet of his wife. The humiliation spread faster than fire. By morning, the story had reached every corner of the ship. Crew members avoided his gaze, passengers laughed behind his back, and Marissa, now firmly attached to her new lover, sneered openly whenever he passed. At lunch, a child even pointed and asked his mother, "Why is that man always crying?" The mother shushed him, but not before Samuel heard. He rose abruptly, knocking over his chair, and stumbled out of the dining hall with his hand covering his face. I saw it all. I heard it all. And still, I said nothing. For silence was the sharpest knife of all. By the 8th day, he no longer walked the open decks. He hid in his cabin, curtains drawn, lights dim, pacing in circles like a trapped animal. My steward told me he muttered prayers to himself, fragments of sermons, half-remembered scriptures. His Bible lay open on the bed, but his eyes were red, his fingers trembling too hard to turn the pages. Once he tried to write a letter. I know because the steward found the scraps, torn pages littered across the floor, words scribbled and crossed out. Forgive. Lost. I'm sorry. He couldn't finish. Shame had stolen even his ability to speak clearly to God, and still the sea moved forward, steady, relentless. The voyage was nearly done, but Samuel's journey had only just begun, because the ocean, like truth, never releases a man until he is paid in full, and he hadn't paid yet. By the 9th day, Samuel was a shadow. He hadn't shaved, his shirt was wrinkled, his eyes swollen from nights without sleep. He drifted through the ship like a ghost no one wanted to see. Passengers no longer whispered behind his back. They spoke openly, like spectators at a theater, pointing, laughing, shaking their heads. Some pitied him, but most didn't. Hypocrites don't earn pity. Marissa passed him once in the corridor, her new man's arm around her waist, her lips stained with fresh lipstick. She smirked as Samuel shrank against the wall to let them by. "Look at you," she spat. "A broken dog. That's all you ever were." She leaned closer, her voice a venomous whisper. "You thought you were my escape. But you were only ever my entertainment, and now everyone sees you for the joke you are." He said nothing. His lips trembled, but his voice had left him. That evening, as the passengers gathered in the ballroom for the last dinner of the voyage, he entered alone. The room hushed for a moment, then filled with low laughter and murmurs. He sat at a table by himself, hands shaking, barely able to lift his fork. Across the hall, I sat with my officers, upright, dignified, answering questions from passengers who praised the voyage. Every eye shifted between us, me, the captain, respected, admired, and him, the fallen man no one wanted to claim. Halfway through dinner, an elderly man stood and raised his glass. "To the captain," he called, his voice booming, "for her strength, her grace, her leadership, a woman like no other." The room erupted in applause, glasses clinking, cheers filling the air. I nodded, smiling faintly. "And Samuel?" He dropped his fork. The sound of their admiration for me was louder than any sermon he had ever preached, louder than every clap he had ever received. He hunched over his plate, tears sliding down his cheeks in front of everyone. Passengers glanced, nudged each other, pointed. He was the spectacle, and he knew it. Later that night, the ship held a farewell service, a small gathering in the chapel for those who wanted to pray before disembarking. Samuel dragged himself there, hoping, perhaps, to find his old voice again. He sat in the front row, head bowed, Bible open but unread. When he tried to pray aloud, his words cracked and broke. "Lord, I... His voice failed him. A ripple of whispers passed through the small crowd. Someone muttered, "He can't even pray anymore." Another said, "His anointing is gone." He lifted his head then and saw me at the back, standing in uniform, arms folded. Our eyes met. His lips trembled, and then, in front of them all, he fell to his knees. "Diana, forgive me," he sobbed. "Please, I beg you." I didn't move. I didn't speak. The silence weighed heavier than words. Passengers turned, watching us both, and I saw it in their faces. Admiration for me, disgust for him. I turned and walked out, leaving him kneeling on the floor, his sobs echoing in the chapel. By the morning of the 10th day, word had spread beyond the ship. Photos, whispers, passengers' stories had already reached the shore through calls and messages. His name was no longer just a joke at sea. It was becoming a scandal on land, and he knew it. That morning, when he tried to leave his cabin, passengers blocked the hall. "Shame on you," one said. "Hypocrite," spat another. He pushed past them with shaking hands, his eyes wild, but there was nowhere left to go. I was on the bridge when he tried one final time. He stormed in, guards hesitating to stop him. He dropped to his knees before me, his voice ragged, desperate. "Diana, please, don't destroy me like this. Don't let them take everything. I'll resign. I'll disappear. Just don't end me like this." I looked down at him, the man who once towered over me in pulpits, who once dismissed my silence as weakness. Now he knelt, broken, begging at my feet in front of my crew. "You ended yourself, Samuel," I said, my voice cold, sharp as steel. "The moment you thought I was nothing." I turned my back. My officers led him away. His cries echoed down the corridor, pitiful, hollow. When the ship docked, the passengers disembarked smiling, waving, shaking my hand, thanking me for the safest, smoothest voyage of their lives. Reporters waited at the port, their cameras flashing, passengers rushing to tell the story of the captain who exposed her husband at sea. And Samuel? He slipped off the ship in the shadows, head bowed. No one cheering, no one waiting. Just a man stripped of everything, his mistress, his pride, his congregation, his God. The sea had delivered, the ship had docked, but I didn't disembark immediately. I stood on the bridge watching passengers stream down the gangway, their voices rising with laughter, their phones buzzing with messages, their stories already spreading. My name was on their lips, their admiration woven into every whisper. They called me strong, they called me brave, they called me captain. But below, Samuel was nowhere to be seen. He hid in the shadows, slipping off like a criminal avoiding the gallows. No one greeted him. No one asked for his blessing. No one held his hand. The man who once craved applause now drowned in silence. And silence was harsher than any crowd. That night, as the ship emptied and the decks grew quiet, he came to me one last time. His steps dragged, his shoulders bent, his face hollow with sleepless nights. He looked older than his years, worn down not by the sea but by his own sin. "Diana," he whispered, his voice barely more than a rasp. "Please, don't leave me like this. I'll change. I'll confess. I'll do whatever you ask. Just don't end me here." I studied him for a long moment. This was the man I once loved, the man I once believed God had chosen for me, the man I carried through poverty, through ridicule, through hunger. I remembered his trembling hands when he first preached, his fear that no one would listen. I had stood beside him then, telling him they would come because he was called, and they had come. But now, even his own voice had abandoned him. "You want me not to end you?" I said, my voice low, steady, each word like a stone sinking into water. "Samuel, I don't need to end you. You ended yourself. The moment you thought my silence meant weakness, the moment you decided I was too small to matter, the moment you chose her over the vows we made before God." His knees gave way. He collapsed before me, sobbing into the steel floor. My crew shifted uncomfortably, but I raised my hand, and they froze. I stepped closer, bent slightly, and whispered so only he could hear. "The sea never hurries, Samuel, but it always delivers, and now it has." I turned and walked away, my shoes striking the deck in perfect rhythm, leaving him kneeling there, broken and alone. And that was how the voyage ended. The passengers left with smiles, carrying tales of their remarkable captain. My name left their lips with admiration. And Samuel? His name left their lips with scorn. The pastor, the hypocrite, the man who was slapped in front of the world. His church would hear, his congregation would see, his God, perhaps, would remain silent. As for me, I stood tall on the bridge, the sea stretching endless before me. I didn't need revenge. I didn't need pity. I had something greater. I had survived. And survival is the sweetest vindication of all. But storms are strange things. They don't always end when the clouds clear. Sometimes they linger, waiting, whispering promises of more to come. And Samuel? His storm had only just begun. So I'll ask you, what do you think happened next? Did the sea take him further than even I imagined? Or did he crawl back to land, trying to rebuild from ashes? Tell me what you think, because this story is far from over. Before you go, let us know in the comments where you're watching from. We'd love to hear from you. And don't forget to hit that subscribe button so you never miss any of our upcoming stories.